Welcome back to No More Heroes, Travis Strikes Again. This stage has a lot of branching paths, so if you want to get everything, you're going to need to maybe go through it a few times. Thankfully, I'll be cutting to the paths you need to take for stuff and telling you which way to go.
Is it one of those where like the
You
the previous area gets cut off and you can't go back?
yeah.
Oh no.
You can see like the enemies spawned in a room number 2. That shows what path I took.
Oh
Yeah,
no.
so-
It's not the biggest deal if you're not going for 100% because everything leads to the end.
Right.
So you'll get the part you need to progress regardless. It's just if you want to get everything for 100%.
Yeah, but if you're also like me,
Did
you'll
you
go
just
through the area
force
5
throw that guy
times.
into the wall?
Yeah.
They just straight up gave Travis Jedi powers now that they have the excuse. Great. Coins.
Hey, I don't know what this means because it's in Japanese.
I recognize the shape. I don't know what it means, but I recognize the shape.
What if it's just like money?
I mean, it is money.
What,
but
what if it?
No, I mean, what if it was what if the word it was?
What if
was
it's
money?
moe? That would.
Hey, what if it's moe? Hey, what if it's mo?
Well, I'm pretty sure you would pronounce moe as well if you were to say it in Japanese.
You would
I have
probably we would have to write it different, so you'd have to write it as and then O. Without
I have
having
I have a theory that
the E at
like
the end.
in anime and video games and stuff, Japanese companies will intentionally not get people who know how to speak English to play their English speaking roles, just so that they don't make their audience self-conscious about how bad their own English is.
they haven't done that for a while. They're usually doing pretty good these days. About
Oh
that.
yeah, that's why like Blue Mary in King of Fighters still sounds English as fuck, even though she's supposed to be able to speak English.
I said better in general, not always.
Well, I mean, it's still very possible for you to be able to speak the language, but you have an
There's
accent.
also like weird cases where like in an anime there's supposed to be like a character who's a native Japanese speaker but also knows English, and you're supposed to get an idea of how smart they are because they can speak English well, but they can't speak English well. Their actor can't do it. So it's like Detective Conan is an example. There are episodes where like they travel to America, right, and you hear Shinichi Kudo speaking English, right? But he's so bad at it. He's so bad. Like, terrible. At that point, you might as well just get a vaguely similar sounding English speaking actor to speak those particular lines. Because,
Well,
like,
that's what they used to do a lot.
no, they don't do it for Shinichi Kudo, I'll tell you that. Ugh.
Well, okay, so back in the day, basically they had like all the Japanese anime and gaming whatever studios had this one agency that had like the few English people who were also actors in Japan, whether they were for like commercials or ads or for like extras in movies or whatever. They would just have them do it, and obviously they didn't really act very well for it because whatever, they didn't care.
Right.
Because
It's a check.
yeah, it's it's the
And
Japanese.
it's
They're
not like
tell
they're
when
gonna
English is
be
good.
able to tell, right?
Yeah, so that's why you have the greatest dubbed black guy in anime from back in the day. If
Wait, what?
you've ever seen that YouTube clip. Okay, so there's this bit. So in this, I think it's like an early 2000s anime. One of them has like a black guy in it, and they use like that talent agency. It's like the whitest sounding dude you could ever imagine.
Oh,
Yeah, but like then there's stuff like Shenmue, where if you're playing it with the Japanese audio on, which is the only way to play it, the English is awful. But if you're playing it with the Japanese audio, very early on in the game, you're gonna meet this guy who's an obvious foreigner on the street, right? And he interjects with a lot of English because it's supposed to be his native language, but he doesn't sound like it's his native language at all. Like, he somehow manages to say a Japanese name in English,
But he's supposed to be a native English speaker.
Yeah, like he's like, I
But,
think he's a black guy. I'm not
okay.
sure. It's been a while since I played, but like he greets you in very bad English. To
I also feel like most people, if they're learning in, like, if they're in a different country, they would probably speak in the language of the other country if they knew it. Like, I feel like most
he does
Spanish people don't talk to, like,
he does
English-speaking people with random Spanish phrases halfway through their sentences
well,
and stuff like that.
well, the Japanese perception of English is a bit different than like the American perception of Spanish. But like, this guy mostly does speak to you in Japanese. He just interjects with English phrases or English words.
English phrases,
or-
yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's something I didn't really think about. Because everyone knows the term Spanglish. That's speaking in Spanish, interjecting with English, or the other way around. Do I really hear that with other languages, and if there's a phrase for that or not.
Yeah.
Like, is there a term for speaking in English and then interjecting? I guess being a weeb. If you're gonna throw in
That
random.
doggy is so kawaii.
Yeah, okay. That sounds terrible. Oh, what about the opposite though? Like speaking in Japanese and just throwing in random English.
I
I'm
mean,
sure
Like,
that
is
there are Westaboos.
There
This
are
is a thing.
Westaboos. It also doesn't help that Japan doesn't have a lot of words for certain things, so they just use the English word for it.
Right.
Like an example is they don't really have a word for email.
Right.
So they have like a Japanese letter. They have a Japanese word for letters that you get in the mail, but they don't have one for like electronic mail. So they just call emails or texts you get just mail in English or meru.
Isn't it also true that they will just use the English version of the word because like the Japanese version is just way like
Well,
wordier?
there is an
it-
odd characteristic of Japanese languages where you've got, your basic Japanese, but then you've got your kanji and all that stuff that's super complicated that you probably don't really get unless you have a serious college education already. So there's that too.
It's also probably just a part of standardization because the rest of the world uses mail for emails, and they just figure why bother making our own word for it? We'll just use what everyone else uses, so it's easier.
Universal
Yeah.
language.
That too.
A little bit, yeah.
But like, the Japanese don't need an excuse to do it. They just interject English words into their songs and stuff. And
That's partially because Japanese doesn't work for our pace for how we do our modern, pop rock songs. Their language doesn't fit the melody style.
neither does English when it's butchered. So
Yes, but just say.
it's kind of a lose-lose situation in a lot of cases. Is all I'm saying. It's like half of it only works because the Japanese don't realize how badly the word has been destroyed. So, wow.
To be fair, though, English still does plenty of that kind of shit too.
Well, English just sucks in general.
English is a bad language, yeah.
Nah, I wouldn't say it's a bad language. It's strange.
It's pretty
you
bad.
you can only say that though because you're a native English speaker.
Well, yeah, I know, but it has like its ways of flowing that make sense internally, at least. Like, yeah, when you try to like line up the rules against the rules of another language, it's a bit difficult to explain, but internally it makes sense. Not so much when you're flowing from Japanese to a busted ass English word and then back again. That's from one rule set to another rule set that's been horribly mangled back to the other rule set. Why? Why do you do this to yourselves?
And like when I was young, it used to baffle me learning that English is considered the hardest language to learn in the world, and I didn't think anything of it. And then you think about all the fucking rules and exceptions and
but
workarounds about
the thing
this.
about
Like,
that is that
this is
that stuff
stupid.
only applies to learning the language. When you already know the language, writing a song in it is pretty straightforward, But
Well, English also has different rules about songs. Like, for example, English is one of the only languages where, or at least compared to, like I'd say Western languages more so. I won't just say English, but like you don't have to rhyme in Japanese songs, for example. Which is there's a really cool article that on I think like the Nintendo Tumblr I think where they were talking about translating Jump Up Superstar from Japanese into English. And it was just like they had such a hard time trying to do it because not only did they have to fit in all of these references and stuff that they were making, but like the Japanese song was making.
They had
but
to make it lyrical. Yes.
They had to make it rhyme.
Yeah, that's translating. Okay, when on the rare occasion when an anime theme song or opening theme song or whatever gets an English version, like with say Rurouni Kenshin or the first theme song to Detective Conan, it's interesting. Or like Kingdom Hearts, for example.
They just gave up after a while.
Yeah, Kingdom Hearts too, like where we get English language versions of the songs. That's another interesting example.
Well, it's interesting for Kingdom Hearts and the first intro for Rurouni Kenshin because they got the actual Japanese artist to do those.
Yeah, and there's
that's
like
a slightly different thing, but
like at least one of the Naruto openings, I forget which one, has an English version that the original Japanese artist did. Even though it was never used.
I'm pretty sure it was the same. I'm not sure about Eyes on Me for Final Fantasy VIII, but Final Fantasy IX Melodies of Life was done in both Japanese and English by the same girl.
Yeah, and there are weird cases where like there's no Japanese language version of a song exactly, but the English version, the only version, was written by a Japanese songwriter in English. And you can kind of tell that they don't 100% have a grasp on how to songwrite in English because it reads like a bad translation.
I appreciate the consistency regardless.
But like it reads like a bad translation even though it's not a translation. Well, it might have been written originally in Japanese and then translated into English. Maybe that was their process for it, but you get the point where the English just doesn't quite line up the way it would if it were written by someone who spoke English natively. Okay, so, like, I know there's a Japanese version of the theme song for Final Fantasy IX, but now that I'm thinking about it, I don't know if there's a Japanese version of Eyes on Me.
I can't think of it. I mean, I don't see why there wouldn't be, considering there was a Japanese version of Melodies of Life.
Well,
and, there was a Japanese version of Ten's
They might
theme.
have done it in English on purpose, even in the Japanese version. I don't know. Around that time, they did do that kind of thing in gaming. That's why Resident Evil 1 has such bad English voice acting.
Yeah,
because
there is. I googled it. There's a Japanese version.
Is it a Japanese version that existed at the time the original game was released, or was it made later?
Yeah, is it from 1998?
I will need to do more research, but it definitely exists.
There are a few cases of games and things that didn't originally have Japanese versions, even though they were made in Japanese. Like Devil May Cry 4 didn't get any Japanese voice acting at all until the special edition, for example. And I think Resident Evil didn't get Japanese voice acting until like way later entries in the series either.
I think it was. I want to say 4 was probably the first one that had Japanese voice acting, just by the nature of the game.
I'm not sure if it did.
I don't even.
From
yeah,
what
I
don't
know.
Just back to Final Fantasy for a second. From what I can tell, I think it was 2004 when it got a Japanese version. I think.
Okay, so not at the time.
Not at the time, but eventually it did, which doesn't surprise me.
Yeah, okay. I had a feeling. That's why I asked.
Wait, was there a Resident Evil with Japanese voice acting? Because
the first Japanese voice acting that I know of in a Resident Evil related thing were the CG movies, actually.
Do they still not Japanese voice act the games now?
I don't know.
I honestly couldn't tell you. Like, I don't think there's ever.
Considering how much more chatty they are now, I would imagine they'd have to.
It's like what they used to do was they just gave it English voice acting with Japanese subtitles, man.
Subtitles.
Yeah, and this led to some odd things. Like, you know how in Devil May Cry 1, the subtitles that you can turn on in the PS2 version only give subtitles to, like, the monsters, the boss monsters that have weird filtered voices. in the original Japanese game, that would be a subtitle for the entire game, which it didn't become in the English version until the HD release on PS4. Which is a little annoying, actually, because the subtitles are fucking huge in Devil May Cry 1. They cover half the screen. I can't turn them on anymore. But that means I can't understand the monsters.
Oh, okay. So if I'm reading this right, the first Resident Evil game to have a Japanese dub was Revelations.
Oh wow, really?
Interesting.
Not even 5?
Huh.
Not even 5.
Huh.
Wow.
Apparently, there was plans for a Japanese dub as early as the first Resident Evil, but it was never used.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I was correct about all the interesting little factoids from the last part. So will we find out more in the next part of No More Heroes? Tune in and find out.